Hello everyone and welcome to today's video lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of poetry. And the poem that we're going to discuss today and learn more about today is Don't Be Afraid of the Dark by the poet Ruskin Bond. Now, before I divulge more into this poem and talk about this poem a little more, let us state the objectives of our lesson today. The lesson objectives for this particular poem are that students will be able to, at the end of this particular lesson, students will be able to recite the poem with fluency and expression, appreciate the style and language of the poem, and lastly, comprehend the theme of the poem. So, based on the lesson objectives that I just stated, in today's lesson, we will be talking about the poem Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. We'll be focusing on some important elements like how to recite this poem, for which I'm going to be focusing on rhythm as well as rhyme. We're going to be talking about elements of poetry and what a poem really is. We're also going to discuss a little bit about the poet. And lastly, we're going to discuss the poem itself, the stanzas, and try to analyze the poem a little bit. Now, before we begin with the poem itself, let us first answer the question, what is a poem? A poem is a form of creative writing where you're expressing your emotions in the form of writing. Now, in a poem, the main elements are that it has a certain rhythm and a rhyme to it. When I'm going to talk about, when I'm going to read Don't Be Afraid of the Dark to you, you'll notice that there is a specific rhyme and rhythm that the poet has used. Similarly, all poems, just like Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, there are other poems as well that have certain rhyme as well as rhythm. Apart from rhyme and rhythm, a poem also has stanzas. A poem does not have paragraphs, but it has stanzas. When a group of lines are written together, they're called stanzas. And a poem also has something called a tone as well as theme. Now, all these together are called your elements of poetry. The elements of poetry include rhythm. Rhythm is the beat, sound, and the feel of the poem. Rhyme, which describes the words that have the same ending sounds. Stanza is a group of lines in a poem. As I explained, there's no paragraph, but there's a stanza. A line is a single row of words in a poem. Mood is the feeling the poet is trying to convey. And theme is a truth, lesson, or message about life. So a poem in totality is all these six elements. There are other elements as well, but for now, these are the six elements that we're going to be focusing on when it comes to the poem Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Now, coming back to the poem itself, our main topic for today, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark by Ruskin Bond, let us first talk about the title itself. Now, the title, if you read it, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, is pretty self explanatory. It's very direct in its message. The main message remains that the poet is trying to convince the child or the innocent little one, how he says in the poem, which we will later read about, to not be afraid of the dark. So the title in itself is very clear. It gives it directly tells us the message or the theme behind this particular poem. Now, before we go and talk about what the poem is really about and we read the poem, it is very important that we talk about who Ruskin Bond is. Because whenever we're trying to understand any form of written work, any form of literary work, it's very important, kids, that you understand who the writer is, who the poet is in this case. Who is Ruskin Bond? Ruskin Bond is a very popular Indian author who has written over 500 short stories, many poems, novels, and other forms of work. His work is usually considered as children's novel, children books, or children's short stories. But if you actually read his work, it's something that all age groups can enjoy. A lot of his work is actually based in the northern India. The background of his work remains the northern India, especially the hilly areas, because he himself has spent most of his life in the hilly areas, and his work is reminiscence of, or his work is actually based on his childhood, on the stories of his childhood. Ruskin Bond has written. It includes The Stops at Shamli, Train at the Oli, Looking for the Rainbow, The Blue Umbrella. All of these are some of the works that Ruskin Bond has written. Let's move to the poem in hand and our main topic for today. Before we talk about what this poem is about and we analyze each of the stanzas, let's first read the poem. Now, before I read, I want to bring to your attention two things. One is that the poem here, if you notice, that it has two stanzas. They are not paragraphs, they are two stanzas. The first stanza and the second stanza. Okay, and next is the rhyming scheme. But I think before I come to the rhyming scheme, I'll read the poem to you once. Now when I read the poem, you will focus on the way I read it, you will listen to it clearly, and you focus on the way I recite this poem and the tone that I use and how I change my tone. Don't be afraid of the dark, little one. The earth must rest when the day is done. The sun must be harsh, but moonlight never, and those stars will be shining forever and ever. Be friends with the night, there's nothing to fear. Just let your thoughts travel to friends far and near. By day it does seem that our troubles won't cease, but at night, late at night, the world is at peace. Now, if you notice that when I was reading this poem, there is a certain rhythm, there is a certain musical element to it. I'm not singing the poem, but you need to keep in mind that there is a musical element when you're reciting any poem. You don't sing the poem, but another thing that you keep in mind is the rhyme. Notice the last words, one, done. They sound, they have the same or a similar sound. All these last words, which have the same color, have same or similar sound. One, done, never, ever, fear, near, cease, peace. All of them together, they are rhyming pairs. One and done, rhyme. Never and ever, rhyme to each other. Fear and near, rhyme. Cease and peace, they're not exactly sounding the same, but they're similar sounding. So they're also considered a rhyming pair. Rhyme plays a very important and crucial role when it comes to the way you recite a poem. Because when you focus on the rhyme, then you're able to recite in a beautiful and a better manner. The poem again. N- Don't be afraid of the dark, little one. The earth must rest when the day is done. The sun must be harsh, but moonlight never, and those stars will be shining forever and ever. Be friends with the night. There's nothing to fear. Just let your thoughts travel to friends far and near. By day, it does seem that our troubles won't cease, but at night, late at night, the world is at peace. Again, the focus will remain on not singing the poem, on the rhyming words, and also on the punctuation marks. You already are familiar with all the punctuation marks that are here. So you need to keep them in mind. You need to keep in mind where you have to take the pause, where you have to take a longer pause and a shorter pause. When there is a comma, there will be a shorter pause. When there is a full stop, there will be a slightly longer pause. With an exclamation mark, there will be more emotions. Your tone will change. So all of these things are to be kept in mind whenever you're reciting a poem. Now, for recitation, I would suggest that all of you Please practice on your own as much as you can. Recite the poem again and again out loud, and this will definitely help improve your recitation skills. Now, let's talk about the poem itself, what the poem really is about. Now, before I talk and in detail about each of these paragraphs, let me just talk about some of the difficult words so that when we do discuss each of the stanzas, you're able to understand those difficult words. Some of the difficult words that are based on your NCERT book, there is something called new words section, and also I've underlined so I've underlined those words, and I've also underlined some of the words that I felt were slightly difficult or slightly new for you. They might not be difficult, they might be new for you, or they might be something that you need to keep in mind. So these are the words. The word meanings are afraid, which means filled with fear, dark, with little or no light. I think it's pretty easy words. These are rest, to relax, or to not do any activity. Harsh. This might be a new word for you. Now, when we talk about harsh, harsh means something which is unpleasant, which is rough in nature, something which probably bothers you. Forever, for always. Troubles, problems. Cease, something that comes to an end. Okay? Now, these are the word meanings. Now that you know these meanings of some of these words which are new to you or might be difficult to you, or the new words that are given in your book, now we can move on to the stanzas and actually understand what the poet is trying to express. So, let me read this again for you. Don't be afraid of the dark, little one. The earth must rest when the day is done. The sun must be harsh, but moonlight never. And those stars will be shining forever and ever. Now let's look at the first line itself. Here, the poet is using the title itself in the first line. Don't be afraid of the dark. Now, as I said earlier, the title itself is very self-explanatory. It is very clear in its message. The poet is giving the message to this little one, to the child. Here, little one is the child that the poet is referring to not be afraid of the dark. Little one is a very sweet nickname, a very comforting nickname that the poet is giving to the child who might be your age. So, in a way, you can say that the poet is actually talking to you, children. So, maybe the poet is talking directly to you and conveying this message to you to not be afraid of the dark. And but why is it that you should not be afraid of the dark? I mean, definitely it's dark. It can be scary for a lot of us because we all see these movies, we all see these horror movies where there are monsters, or when there is dark, horrible things happen and ghosts come out. But why is it that the poet tells us to not be afraid of the dark? So the first thing he says is that the earth must rest. Just like how after a tiring day, how we're all tired after we've had a day full of work, similarly, the earth is working the entire day. So the earth also wants to rest. So when you want to rest, you switch off your lights and sleep. Similarly, the earth wants to rest. So when the day is done, the earth must rest. The darkness is important. It is something which is inevitable, something which is going to happen because night always comes. So so that the earth must rest, the night must come when the day is done. When the earth has a tiring day, so that the earth can rest, night must come. The next two lines talk about the sun must be harsh, but moonlight never, and those stars will be shining forever and ever. He gives you a reason. He gives the little one, the child, or you, the reason that that the sun, when you are in the evening, not even evening, but during the afternoon or during noon, especially when the sun is right above your head, the sunlight is so harsh. It is unpleasant to your eyes. You can't look directly towards the sun, right? But during the night, when moon comes out, you can look at the moon. And it doesn't trouble your eyes. It doesn't make your eyes watery. Because the moonlight is not harsh. It's calming. It's something which soothes you. So the one more reason that the poet is giving to you, to the child, to not be afraid of the dark is that even though that night has fallen and it's dark, but there is moonlight, and moonlight is pleasant. It is something which is comforting. And along with the moonlight comes the friends of the moon, which are the stars. And those stars are some always shining on us. At night, it's not like it's completely dark. There is moonlight. There are stars that shine upon us, and they continue to shine on us forever and ever. So the first stanza is just an introduction where the poet is addressing to the little child who he calls the little one, a- and tells that how why we should not be afraid of the dark. And the reasons he gave is one, because the earth must rest, so it is important that night comes. Second, because the sun is harsh, but moonlight is not, so there's nothing to be afraid of during the darkness. And thirdly, it's not always completely dark because the stars are there, there's moon who are shining on us. Let's move on to the second stanza. Second stanza again for you. Be friends with the night. There's nothing to fear. Just let your thoughts travel to friends far and near. By day, it does seem that our troubles won't cease, but at night, late at night, the world is at peace. Now, the poet is talking about that you have nothing to fear the darkness. He already talked about in the first stanza. But now, from that, he's taking another step and telling you that instead of fearing the night, instead of fearing the darkness, you should become friends with the night. You should become friends with the darkness because there's actually nothing to fear. There's nothing because night is something that you should be friends with. It's not something to be afraid of. He tells that night gives you an opportunity to let your thoughts travel, let your thoughts travel here and there. Now, in the second line, just let your thoughts travel to friends far and near. It needs to be keep in mind. You need to keep this in mind that this can have two meanings. One meaning could be that the poet is saying that just let your thoughts travel to friends far and near. That means just think about your friends, think about your in in your case you can think about your school friends, your colony friends, your cousins, and all your friends that you have. So let your thoughts travel to them, think about them. Another thing that could be another perception of this line, or another way of thinking about this line, could be that the poet is saying that at night, when the world is quiet, it's calm all around, you have the time to let your thoughts free, let your mind be free. Think about things, be curious, dream about different things, whatever you feel like. So this there can be two perception to the second line. The poet is saying to be friends with the night because the night gives you an opportunity to think about your friends, and also it could mean that to think about different things, to be curious, to dream. So the night gives us an opportunity to let our mind wander. The third line talks about how that during the day, how I just talked about that earth is just like us, earth is working the entire day. So that's what he's bringing back again, that during the day, it's constantly, we're so busy that our problems don't stop. We're constantly working. We're busy with things. We're studying. We have homework to do. We have classwork to do. We have other things to do. So during the day, we're so busy, our problems don't stop. But at night, finally, when the work is done, irrespective your problem is solved or not, but you can relax, you can sleep in peace. So another reason to be friends with the night is that the night gives us an opportunity to be at peace, to calm down, which we cannot do the entire day, but at night, entire world is at peace, the entire world is quiet. So, in totality, the second stanza moves from telling the child to not be afraid of the dark to actually being friends with the darkness, to being friends with the night. So, the first stanza is about not being afraid of the dark and why you shouldn't be afraid of the dark. To actually, second stanza is about being friends with the dark, being friends with the night. Now that we have analyzed both these stanzas, let's go back to the elements of poetry that we talked in the beginning of the lesson. And we're going to correlate those elements with our particular poetry in hand, that is Don't Be Afraid of the Dark by Ruskin Bond. We have already discussed the rhythm and the rhyme. So the two of the elements of poetry we have discussed when we were talking about recitation part of this poem. Now we're going to talk about the theme and mood as well as lines and stanzas. Now you must have noticed that there are two stanzas, each consisted of 4 lines. So which means that there are 2 stanzas in total and 8 lines. Now theme of the poem. The theme of the poem is one must not be afraid of the dark as it is part of life. During the night, there's moonlight and stars that provides us comfort and shine upon us. Also, night puts a pause to all our problems and we can let our thought wander. So this is the basic theme of the poem. The basic theme of the poem, or the basic idea behind the poem, by this particular poem by Ruskin Bond, is to not be afraid of the dark as it is something which is part of life, something which is inevitable, something that is going to happen. And there's nothing to be afraid of that darkness, because during the night when it is dark, there's moonlight, there's stars who gives us comfort, who shine upon us. Also, night puts a pause to our problem. It lets our thought wander. This is our main theme of the poem. Now, when we come to mood of the poem, or the feeling that the poet is trying to convey here, is that the tone he is using with that the poet is using towards the child is very comforting and polite. He's trying to convince the child to not be afraid of the dark. So this is our major mood. So the feel that the poet is trying to bring forward through this poem is of comfort, of politeness, of kindness, because even in the way he addresses the child as a little one, he's trying to be comforting, he's trying to be polite, trying, because he's not trying to scold you or the child here in question to not be afraid of the dark. He's not scolding the child, he's convincing the child, he's trying to explain to the child why not to be afraid of the dark, but in a beautiful and polite manner. So these are the elements of poetry. Lastly, let's discuss some of the key points to remember. You can also say that this is a recapitulation of whatever we have done so far. So this poem is called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. It's by the poet Ruskin Bond. So let's just go through these key points. First thing, as I just said, the poet addresses a child as a little one and he tells the child to not be afraid of the dark. Second thing, the point that you need to remember is night always comes after day. It is natural. Thirdly, poet explains to the child that just like how we get tired, the earth gets tired as well. The earth also needs to rest after a long day. During the day, the sun is harsh and shines too strongly. But during the night, the light of the moon gives us peace, and, and stars also shine upon us. Fifth point. In the second stanza, the poet suggests the child to embrace the darkness, to be friends with the night. So the first stanza is about not being afraid of the dark, and the second stanza moves towards being friends with the dark. Next point. He asks the child to let his or her thoughts travel to friends far and near. Now this could mean thinking about your friends, or it could also mean about dreams, about dreaming, about letting your thoughts wander. And last point, day brings chaos and everyone is busy. At night, all troubles come to a halt or a pause and there is peace. So these key points to remember, if you just read them once, you'll be able to fully understand what the poem is about. The message of the poem is very simple. The poet is asking the child to not be afraid of the dark but actually being friends with the night, letting your curiosity wander, letting your thoughts wander at night, and embracing that darkness, because the darkness brings peace. It shouldn't frighten us, but it would, if we accept that, it would actually provide us with the peace. So with this, we come to the end of our lesson. I hope you understood the poem. This is a beautiful poem written by Ruskin Bond. And if you appreciate this poem, you learn a lot. You learn about the art of poetry, the beauty of poetry. Also learn about what this poem is particularly about. Thank you for tuning.